Okay, great, great. Okay, yeah, we're up. All right, great. So we'll go ahead and get started with the check-in then. Um, I can go ahead and start. Set an example, show how it's done. What's up, y'all? I'm feeling like a like a what's the like green, like freshly sprouted plant. I was trying to think of the term for like a freshly sprouted plant. So green, like a freshly sprouted plant, feeling like a seven tonight, feeling all right. And something that I'm grateful for. Um, I think I'm grateful just like especially right now, especially in light of recent events, really just grateful for this community, my community. Um, and just to be like, in community with people who are resilient, adaptive, creative, and, I don't know if optimistic is the way to describe it, but, driven enough to keep fighting, and to keep working, even when things seem very, very hard. So that's what I'm grateful for. And I'll pass it to Z.
Hey Sheree and hey to
Hey.
everyone watching. Uh it's good seeing your face again. Feeling like a dark green. I'm probably a 7.5 after eating Jewish cooking. I feel good. Really I think practices of gratitude are super important, especially in like difficult or trying times, and I've been trying to build mine. So I have a long list of what I'm grateful for just today, but for right now I think that I have friends and family that are supportive and are looking for the opportunities and the challenges, because I need positivity like that in my life. And I'll pass to Tara.
I know you don't want to be on camera, but please scoot a little closer. It'll make it easier for us to hand the mic to you, and you don't have to be in the frame.
She's running from her food though. Okay.
Hey everybody. Hey Sheree. Um Tara here. I'm feeling like a black infinity and definitely I ditto what has been said so far. Y'all literally read my mind. But I guess to go down the list, I'm grateful for I guess the opportunity, the ability to continue learning. Um and just the I guess excitement to continue learning and stuff and just not being attached to what is happening in this moment. Um just continue to learn and to adapt. Yeah. All right. I'll pass to you, Cherie.
Hey, hey, I am a six gold. And I'm grateful for the community. And I'm grateful for my children. I'm grateful for my husband and family, my mother, and I'm grateful for my elders. I think my elders always put it in perspective. They always remind you we have been here before, and that the things that we have created to keep us grounded in the reality of the world, but not becoming ground down by the reality of the world, has been really powerful and illuminating and liberating for me. So thank you for my elders.
Definitely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think is Rasul, are you still on the call?
Yeah, can you not see me? My name pop up at all?
Yes, I want to pass it to Rasul.
Yeah.
How's it going? I am a Orange 7, and I'll say I'm very grateful for my loving family, all my sisters, and my community. That's been with me for the last probably going on 2 decades now. I'm looking forward to continuing on with them. Come with me.
All right.
Is there anyone else in the room?
I think M and Mama Pambana had to hop off to go to dinner. So I think the only other person here is Nas on tech.
That's a nice.
All you Nas.
Hey y'all, feeling like a non-purple today. And then second question, family. We gonna leave it there. That's what.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, man. Well, wonderful. Thank you everybody for checking in. And hopefully if you're, even if you're not in the room, hopefully you at least checked in with yourself. So, we may have more people join us on the Zoom or here in person, as we proceed through the conversation. And if we do, we'll just wait for the natural pauses in the conversation to let them get their check-ins in as well. But for now, I think we can go ahead and get started on the topic of our discussion today, which is Echo Tree by Henry Dumas, a collection of fictions by one of the great writers and poets and musicians, I believe, as well, of the Black arts movement. So I think a good place today, we're doing really like an introductory session to this author, this text, and then over the next two sessions, yep, Sheree's got her copy right there. And then over the next two sessions, we've picked out a set of stories, and then we're gonna go through six stories over the next two sessions. But today is really just like introduction, and so I think with that note, I'll pass it over to Sheree to do a little bit of introduction and history on exactly who Henry Dumas is.
Okay.
So all you, Sheree.
All right. So welcome. I'm so excited to introduce you to Henry Dumas. If you are not already familiar with him, he is one of my favorite writers. I have quite a few, but some of these writers, they had such an impact on me when I first read their work. Of course, Zora Neale Hurston. Thank you, Alice Walker, for doing the excavation work to remind us. Thank you, Spike Lee, for quoting from her novel. Their eyes were watching God in the beginning of She's Gotta Have It. All these wonderful things are important, that excavation and reminding future generations of the treasures we have from the past. Henry Dumas is one of those treasures to me. The first book I read of his was called Ark of Bones. And it has a wonderful introduction by Dr. Eugene Redmond, who is his executor for his estate and who has almost single-handedly kept Mr. Dumas's work in the world, and really gave it the proper historical and cultural context of what he was doing. He was very adept at writing not only fiction, but also poetry. He's a fine poet, as well as, of course, as Shin has said, he was a musician and performed and practiced with Sun Ra and Sun Ra's orchestra. So he just did a great deal. And just to give you a little more context about when he was and how he was, I'm just going to give you some biographical information. He was born in the South, just like Sun Ra, born in the South, just like me, and Zora and others. And I think the contributions of Southern writers, and forgive me, I don't know if you can hear the excitement in the background. Can you hear it?
Not quite.
Okay, good, because it sounds like World War III out here, but it's New York being New York. I'm near a hospital, a precinct, and some fire station.
All the big city stuff.
All the stuff. But he was born July 20th in 1934. Okay, so he's coming like after the Depression, right? In Sweet Home, Arkansas. And I always think of that Sweet Home. I think of Toni Morrison's Beloved, right? And the way geography shapes us as a people, and the way the geography, even if we leave that geography, still imprints itself on our personalities and on the stories we tell each other and the stories we tell ourselves. So even though Henry Dumas moved and lived elsewhere, he always carried the beauty and the power and the magic and the history of the South with him in his work, in his writing, and in his presence. Unfortunately, his life was cut down short by a New York City subway officer. It's unclear what exactly were the circumstances, what was really happening. We do know that the police officer was young, and I don't believe he continued on after taking Henry Dumas's life. But he was survived by his spouse, the wonderful Mrs. Loretta Ponton, Loretta Dumas, of course, who has also worked very hard to make sure that his work and legacy continues with us. He studied in Rutgers University, City College of New York, and elsewhere. He also was very active in the civil rights movement. He provided supplies and support to activists in Tennessee and in Mississippi. So this informs some of his fiction and some of the work that he's done. Of course, he was a veteran. He was in the Air Force and published work in the periodicals of the Air Force as well. So he has, had been doing a lot. And if you want to read other works by him and also read the original essays, this one includes a foreword by Dr. Eugene Redmond, who is Professor Emeritus. He's from East St. Louis. So he continues that amazing, wonderful work at East St. Louis. And he knew Catherine Dunham, and it was the publisher of Drum Voices Review. His daughter, Dr. Treasure Reverend Shields, also continues that legacy, and I suspect will be continuing to keep Henry Dumas's work alive once her father passes that baton on to her as well. And hopefully that Dr. Redmond will be able to join us in our later meetings, one of our later meetings, because he has the insight and stories on Henry Dumas that only his family and friends would know. And that would be amazing to hear from him. But the edition that we have has a introduction by wonderful writer John Keene. But I want you to read Ark of Bones in the original version of it. It is the title story of that collection, and it's fantastic. You also can read Needs of a Natural Man, which is another one of his books that I think is important to look at. Goodbye, Sweetwater, right? You want to check that out, of course. And if you're like me, I usually get multiple editions of books because I like to see how it was originally presented to us. If the story lineup changes, what stories are in and what stories are not, and also how the work has held up over the years, which is why those introductions, which I usually skip for other books. I'm just going to admit, I usually skip the introduction, read the work first. Then if I'm really excited, go back and read the introduction. But that will help you understand the context in which the work was created and everything. But yes, he did not have the full time that you would hope he would have had to be able to write his work and to publish his work. We don't know what he would have created for us in the years ahead, but his life was taken on May 23rd in 1968 in New York City. And so when you think about extrajudiciary killings of Black people, particularly Black men, before they have even been afforded a judge or a jury or a court or anything, they get a death sentence. It's heartbreaking. And so he definitely was taken in that way. And I often think what he would have contributed and what he would have had to say about the movements that followed the modern civil rights movement, including the struggles in Ferguson, which ignited our whole country and helped inspire Black Lives Matter, which also inspired people around the world to look at these issues as well. And that's the context for his work. He always used Black vernacular, the way that Southerners speak. And I think that's very important. He cared about young people and children. And so their perspectives on the world were treated with a great deal of love and respect in his writing. Their connection to our ancestors, that connection, they still are connected in spirit, it seems, and that recognition of magic and power was always a thread that was woven through his storytelling and his writing. And that's seen very beautifully in Ark of Bones. So Ark of Bones is definitely one of the stories that we'll be reading together. You want to tell them the other dates so they can join us, and hopefully it will give them time to read and to think about their feelings about the work that they're reading.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll give those dates, and then I can share some of just my own reflections, just on on like this particular compilation, and then also just like on, my understanding of like who he was as well. But so like I said, this is our introductory session. And we'll actually be back in December for the next two sessions. So plenty of time for folks to, get yourself a copy of the book, or even just like to find copies of the specific stories that we're going through. And I think what we can do is we can sort of like post that list of stories to our social media and our newsletters. So be looking at our Instagram and our Facebook, and subscribe to the newsletter if you're not already, in the coming weeks, to learn a little, to just like have that somewhere that you can reference it. But the next session, when we'll go through the first three stories that we've selected, will be December 11th. And then the final session, the third session, will be December 27th, I believe.
Yep.
So
The second day of Kwanzaa, Kuchichagalia.
yes, second
Uh,
day of Kwanzaa, Kujachagalia.
Mrs.
So
Mrs. Paulette Fair for that recommendation.
yeah, thanks. Shout out to Mrs. Paula Fair for that wonderful idea. And some of you who remember when Mumbo Jumbos were on Friday, I'm sure it'll be a nice return to form. But yeah, so the stories that we'll be going through throughout the course of this book study, and I'll repeat. I can repeat these as many times as people want. We can talk about them a little bit more in detail as well, if you guys would like. But the first three are going to be Ark of Bones, Echo Tree, and then the Distributors. And then the second three are going to be oop, there goes my iPad. The second three are going to be the metagenesis of Sun Ra. We're going to do Riot or Revolt. And then I think we said we were going to do, did we say the University of Man?
I think so. It was
Yeah,
yes.
the University of Man. So, and we can come back to that and repeat it if you guys need. But I definitely agree with everything that you shared, Sheree, just about, well, I guess I'll say that I think that one of the things that struck me the most as I was like learning more about Henry Dumas was like how young he was when he passed. I believe he was 33, and so like to have this work of like stories that was released posthumously, and just like to see him express so much, uh, and to be like taken so early, it definitely does like force you to wonder, like, wow, what would his responses have been, to the 70s and the 80s and then the 2000s, the rise of the internet and all that. Especially just because, like, you know, I think that like his sometimes when writers are very present in their own moment, they almost become like prescient, when writers are like tapped in enough to the circumstances of their time, they begin to almost like predict the future. I think Octavia Butler is a good example of that. I think Zora Neale Hurston is a good example of that as well. And I think that Henry Dumas is definitely a great example of that. One of the stories that we're going to discuss, the distributors, is really about technology. And it's about, this new machine that comes out that can do everything for you, like in the blink of an eye. You all know what I'm talking about. But the sort of like the tension in that story is between, the majority of people who hop onto this new technology very, very fast, who buy sort of like the sales pitches that are used to distribute it, basically, and the minority of people who remain more skeptical, and don't take on quite as fast, and just like the divide that like those different like approaches can take. And like we said, I think that we've seen that theme echoed throughout history, and and it's as loud as ever right now, especially in some of these conversations around AI. So yeah, so that was definitely one thing that struck me, just like how thoughtful he is about, the things that he's seeing, and, how that like causes him to sometimes like look ahead almost. I definitely also agree with the point just about like the significance that he places on the imaginations, I think, of children. Both Echo Tree and Ark of Bones are really about children, specifically about I think that like some of the one of the relationship dynamics that saw come up a lot throughout the stories is just the relationship dynamics between young boys, friends, young boys and older men. Definitely there was some like conversation about like the relationship between like young boys and like women, especially like, mothers and grandmothers. And I think that it stood out to me just because I think that we live in a time where children are really not given a lot of agency or respect. And, maybe they never have been given that. But, I think that there's almost a reverence for like the minds of children in Echo Tree, in the stories of Echo Tree. Um, because and I think that the way that I interpret it is basically being like, because children are so curious, because children are so free, they're often much more sensitive to the spiritual, the supernatural, those intangible things, and are, in fact, uh, really able to engage. There's one story that we're not going to talk about in depth, but that I do, did really stick to me, called The Voice, which is about a group of young men. They're like in a singing group, and one of their friends passes away very suddenly from meningitis, and they're all like, preteens. And basically the whole story is like a debate between this like group of young children about whether or not God exists, so it's like it's those types of like really deep introspective conversations and perspectives that I feel like normally people don't imagine children as being able to have like intelligently. But here he is like showing that like no, this is stuff that children grapple with, and really have to grapple with because you know they are exposed to the horrors of the world just as the adults are, um, but they have that different sort of like frame of reference that sometimes causes them to approach it a little bit differently. So yeah, and I think that I think the last thing I'll say, and then I maybe just want to try and open it up to some questions, is the importance of spirituality in his work. I think is really important to pay attention to. As Sheree mentioned, he grew up in the South. He grew up in Arkansas, and took a lot of inspiration from uh, the spirituality and religion of his community. And like as Sheree mentioned, he played jazz with Sun Ra, but one of his great inspirations was also gospel music. And so I think that once again, throughout Echo Tree, there's a lot of conversation, one about like, religion and like traditional Black religion, Christianity, but also spirituality, and more like, I would say like more uh, forms of spirituality that are more in line with, I would say like African spirituality or indigenous spirituality. That, I think there are definitely some the story that I mentioned, The Voice, about the young singers who lose their friend. Part of their debate happens with a rabbi, So I think there's also this sort of like exploration of multiple different religions and faiths. During his time in the military, he spent some time in the Middle East, and so like he, developed a deep appreciation for Islam during that time. So you see like influences of like the Nation of Islam in there, for example, and just like other forms of that faith. So, and I think like his I think that the real like power of spirituality in his writing, I think, is this idea that spirituality connects us to things that are bigger and older than us. Um, Ark of Bones and Echo Tree, two of the first stories that we're going to be reading, are really about having a connection to the past, I believe, and having a connection to the people who came before, and more than just having a connection, but being able to engage with those spirits, being able to learn from those spirits, and especially now, I think that just like being, Sankofa, you have to look back to move forward, and just this idea that we can use the lessons of our ancestors, the lessons the of the past to guide us, and shape our journey into the future. And but just that we have to be sensitive enough to listen when those spirits speak to us. So yeah, I would love, I think I have, some questions for Sheree, to sort of like, give us a little bit more context about Henry Dumas and about this work. But I would also love to open it up to any of the folks in the room or on the Zoom if there's anything you'd like to know about the stories, about Henry Dumas, you know, just anything at all. What you got, Nas? Yeah, come get it.
Yeah, quick one. I want to an answer from Chin and from Sheree if I could, but I'm curious, who do you guys think after reading the book, who was Henry Damas's target audience, do you believe?
I'll let you take that one first, Sheree.
I think us. I think he's part of the reason why his work is important to me is that he didn't spend a lot of energy and effort trying to translate Black culture to other people. You get in where you fit in, just like we have to get in where we fit in when we're reading other people's cultural creations, right? There is a lot of effort to try to put you in the space. There's an assumption that you know. And so when you read Henry Dumas's work, you're getting pretty close to authentic Black Southern culture, right? And it's an important thing. I don't think it's understood how politically fraught it is to choose to write in Black vernacular, right? Most writers of English are almost kind of beat down to write in standard English and what have you, to show that you have merit, to show that you have the right to tell a story in the culture, and to be considered worthy of being read. And there are people who worked very, very hard in spite of the popularity of it, I might say, to show that the way that we speak is natural, the way that we speak is worthy of celebration, and that it is genius in and of itself. And that's a whole nother conversation about Black American cultures. And I put an S on that because depending on where you are, whether you're in the Gullah Geechee Islands, right, along the what they call the Low Country, right, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, what have you, or whether you're in the deep Mississippi Delta, Mississippi, Tennessee, right, Louisiana, wherever you happen to be, or if you're in, Louisiana or, Alabama, Arkansas, we have a particular way that we move, a way that we talk, and the references are in it. So I believe anyone could read the work, obviously, but he was writing specifically for Black people. And think about the context in which he was writing. He was writing during the Black arts movement. And while a lot of his contemporaries were writing what we consider as realism, right? He and others were doing what Amira Baraka discussed as Afro-surrealism. And there is a writer, a journalist, D. Scott Miller, who had studied this, read the work that Amira Baraka, formerly known as Leroy Jones, had written about Henry Dumas, talked with Amira Baraka about it, and expanded the concept of what Afro-surrealism is. And in fact, you can read his manifesto and read some of the other work that he has done on the topic. Henry Dumas's work has now been expanded to be considered not only Afro-surrealism, but also an early example of Afrofuturism as well. And Chin, of course, talked about some of the extrapolation and speculative work he was doing with the distributors and some of the other stories as well. I like to think of his writing as the marvelous real. right? The way Aleje Carpentier, the Cuban historian and writer, thought about it when he was um, finding a way to write about the history of Haiti and their independence movement. And he wanted something that was beyond the normal tools of historiography, right? He wanted something that could capture the faith of the people and the spirit of the people and treat it with respect and treat it like it was real or super real or marvelous real. And I think that's also what Henry Dumas is doing in his work as well. So we call it mumbo jumbo, but his contemporaries also included Ishmael Reed, of course, which the mumbo jumbo is sort of a reference to, but also mumbo jumbo was part of Black culture, part of hoodoo, right? And also part of that Black language that we're talking about, where you have African retentions, things that we carried with us across the water during the Middle Passage, during the Ma'afa, right? And things that were not stolen from us, because you can't take everything out of a person's head. You can't take everything out of their spirit. You can't take the rhythm out of their bones, out of their hips and out of their hands. And I feel like Henry Dumas really, on the short time that he was journeying as a writer, really took some of that out of his own spirit and cultural memory and put it in his pages and put it in his work. And that's why it's so relevant and so powerful almost 50 years later.
Yeah, definitely. I want to second all of that. And I think really the point that I want to sort of like focus in on to start is that point about like him really seeking to capture us as we are, you know? And I think that like another one of his contemporaries that comes to my mind when you talk about that, when you talk about people who write in Black vernacular, is going to be Zora Neale Hurston, because like that's something that she was like in famous and infamous for.
Yeah.
And in fact, really sort of people's like aversion to that and aversion to being perceived as, you know, less educated, less refined or whatnot. You know, and their aversion to capturing that in her writing is one of the reasons that she did not get her flowers like she probably should have when she was alive. Um, and, you know, on the topic of Zora Neale Hurston, in one of her stories slash articles, Hi John de Conquer, which
Conqueror.
is one, yeah, Hi John the Conqueror. Yes, absolutely. Um, uh, she mentions, she's basically telling the story of her auntie telling her the story of High John the Conqueror. And one of the things that her auntie says, sort of in passing, is this idea like, you know, basically she says, like, don't become one of those Black people that's so educated that you don't believe anything, you know? And that piece in that story really stood out to me because I think that, you know, it goes back to that concept of elite capture, you know, this idea that you can become so quote unquote educated, um, slash really like ingrained in the status quo of the education system that you become detached from your cultural heritage, you know, your cultural legacy and like those cultural forms of knowledge. And I think that like something that what I think that what writers like Zora Neale Hurston, writers like Henry Dumas are trying to do is trying to reverse that somewhat, you know, trying to elevate, you know, like Sheree said, the marvelousness, the brilliance of our people when we are authentically ourselves, you know, when we aren't trying to change the way that we talk and present for, you know, the white were the majority at the time. Now, not so much. But I think that one of the stories in here, and actually, I think that that was the story we had planned to talk about instead of the University of Man. But it's called "Will the Circle Be Unbroken?" And it's basically about a group of white jazz heads, you know, jazz fanatics who, basically bully their way into a jazz club and are instantly killed by the jazz music. So it's a little comical. It's a little, as we said, surreal. But I think it speaks to, um, really just the idea that everything that we do doesn't have to be for everybody else. There can and should be even some things that really, you know, are intended for us, and that's not to say that other people can't be, welcomed in, that other people can't participate, but in order to do so, they need to understand what they're getting themselves into. And so yeah, I think that, that's to me, like that's a big aspect of like his writing and who he's writing for. It's to really like, and once again, it's the Black arts movement. It's all about building that sense of pride and identity and this concept of blackness, and in fact, one of the other stories that we're going to talk about, one of the last ones, Riot and Revolt, talks a lot about that, just like what it means to craft this identity and what it means to like demand some form of like sovereignty through doing that. So yeah, I think just like to Naz's original question, like, yeah, he's writing for us, for all of us, or for all of us who believe, you know, that we are our own people, and that we don't need to try to fit in or to, integrate necessarily, to be worthy of, respect and dignity and, everything that comes with being a real human being. So, yeah, you know.
I think the fact that that even has to be a part of the conversation, not necessarily um the part, the question of like who's the audience, who's the ideal audience for it, but the fact that you even have to say that some things are for the culture, some things are for us, is a factor of us being in the mouth and the belly of the beast, right? We're here in America, right? For the most part, we're here, and so much of Black contributions to the country, to the world, have been monetized for other people, and it's been used as like they literally have been able to live generations off of Black creative productions. If I'm speaking of the music industry, I'm speaking of movies, I'm speaking of just, we have a gazillion inventions, right? That everyday inventions that we contributed to that no one ever really thinks about. Maybe some children in the middle school or elementary school during Black History Month will be able to go and say, oh, so and so did this, create that. But in terms of like the volume of the sheer volume of it, it's kind of it's amazing, consider the erasure and the silence about it. And so if your whole identity as a country, America, when people think of things about America, cultural things, they're usually thinking about things that Black people in America created. All right. Almost every genre of music that you think of that's American, Black people in America created it. And then it gets exported around the world and everyone enjoys it. And then they it's theirs at that point. Right. So if you go, oh, hey, yeah, because we're still in that dynamic where Black cultural creations are colonized, even sometimes other Black people in the diaspora parrot back that colonizing perspective. Either they don't identify it, don't see it as your creation, or they see it as their own because it's American, it's all over the world because of the colonial work that's been done, right? And so a reason why I'm speaking on this is because I think that no other people, well, I won't say no other people, but I don't really see other communities having to justify their culture within their own country, in the way that I see Black Americans having to. If you have a way of speaking, I mean, Spain has multiple dialects. China has at least 12, maybe 13, maybe more, right? The African continent, with all of the African nations, have multiple tongues, multiple mother tongues, and people are skilled at speaking multiple languages. You don't have to justify them speaking in their own language. They don't have to justify creating art and music in their own language all the time. It's understood. But we always feel like we have to do it. And you're not considered, people have many different Caribbean accents. They have their patois, etc. They're not considered less intelligent because they're speaking in their native tongue, right? That's a dynamic that is interesting in the United States. It becomes very politically fraught. And so when you're creating art, when you're creating work that doesn't vilify that tongue, doesn't vilify that art, but actually lifts it up and celebrates it, you have already made a very strong political choice as an artist. You talked about Zora Neale Hurston. One of the works that Henry Dumas wrote was Jonah and the Green Stone, right? Play Ebony, Play Ivory, all these different works. And I think if you look at from his beginning writings to what he left us with towards the end of his life, which of course he didn't know was going to be the end of his life, right? There's such a journey into, it's kind of an expanding, a deepening appreciation for what it means to be Black in America, what it means to be a part of a community, and what that looks like when you are in these different circumstances. The last story that we're going to talk about together, and of course, anyone in the audience can mention any of the stories that they read that they like, and we can chat about that as well, because I would really love to speak about a few of the others if their time permits. But riot or revolt, right? I hope I didn't, yeah, okay. It could have been about Tamir Rice, right? It could have been about any number of people. And he had no idea, though it wasn't inconceivable at the time, obviously, that he was writing possibly about himself in the future, right? And so some things are definitely having that kind of vision, you know, of seeing the future, of being an oracle, of course, right? Of understanding, because this is the work of speculative fiction writers anyway, of extrapolating where we are now, thinking about where we have been, and extrapolating to where we could go. If this goes on, what if, those kinds of questions, right? But also, the thing I think that people don't talk about enough is that some of the things that seem like prediction are actually just the fact that we haven't changed our culture, that our political reality has not changed. And that the themes that proto-science fiction writers were writing about in the 1850s, in the 1890s, in the 1900s, right? Liberation writing in these kind of imaginative spaces are similar to things that were happening later during the Harlem Renaissance and during the Black arts movement and et cetera, because our position in the society was still being deeply, you know, controlled, and that we weren't fully free and we didn't have our citizenship. And the fact that we're still fighting for citizenship in the 21st century, you know, when all of these writers have been imagining these other kinds of futures, right? We're still writing those stories because we're still fighting those same battles. You understand what I'm saying? And I think that's something that we should think about when we're reading the work of Henry Dumas and other writers in his, you know, his contemporaries as well. And we'll talk further about other people. If you like Henry Dumas, who else should you be reading, right? But I think it's a powerful thing that his work, in a way, almost echoes the work that Zora was doing earlier, right? And as you said, kind of went a hard way because she was doing that kind of work, you know. But here we are, full circle, right? As well. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
No, I mean, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had a question in my head, and like what you just shared kind of exaggerates the question even more. Like hearing what you have to say, it just makes me think that authors like Henry Dumas are like superheroes, right? And they are doing this work of like capturing the authentic nature of our Black culture, especially here in America. So then I guess my question to you and to anyone else would be like, say, for example, there's a new and up and coming author, or just like, how do you go about capturing that authentic culture of us and stuff in a way to where it's relatable, in a way to where it feels genuine and we feel like connected to it? Like, what do you feel like that somebody who's interested in like capturing it and like sharing it with us for us would need to get that authentic nature of us?
I think there are a number of techniques that writers can use, but part of it, the gift that Henry Dumas has and other writers have, I think too, that makes them extra special, is that they're poets. And poets, like visual artists, are very observant, and they pay attention to not just what is said, but how it's said. They're looking at the silent parts of us. They're looking at body language. They are thinking about the connection to things, the relationships between things. They are expressing complex feelings in ways that resonate, that are simple, that can really give you a vivid image with sometimes a minimalist approach to words, right? And I think for you to, if you to think about the culture, you got to be a part of the culture. That's one, right? It's a challenging thing to not be a part of the culture and to try to write about it with any type of authenticity. So that's why it's important. Writers can write about anything they want, obviously, and you do your due diligence, do your research and everything, and you get other people maybe who are closer to the culture, perhaps to double check and read and give you some other insights on what you've created, just in case there's some pitfalls or things that you might have misunderstood in your own exploration of it, or just things to be aware of, because you write what you want doesn't mean that it's going to be received always the way that you hope, right? But so there's some things you can do so that it's not unforced errors, right? But part of it is writing about what you truly know and feel and what you truly know. That's what really makes the work sing, I think. Of course, we all have this human experience. We're here having this human experience in all these different bodies and identities and times, right? And all these different geographies and cultural lenses and political, social, economic lenses that we have. But when you are part of a culture, you listen and you lean in to what is happening, right? And what makes us believe it is because it feels like truth. You've gotten really close to that truth. It doesn't mean that you write everything that person says phonetically, right? Because that can make it difficult for people, right? So you almost do a kind of impressionist hand waving or brushing, giving us a sense, just enough so that we get a sense that, I'm in this part of Texas. Oh, I'm in this part of Missouri, or however you're going to say it, right? I know in my hometown, there are multiple accents, and I can usually tell where you're from by not just your accent necessarily, but by the vocabulary, right? By what by your phrases, how you greet me sometimes. There's certain things that people say in different parts of the city, right? And that can come through. And that comes from being a part of the culture, being around the culture, being respectful of that culture, and really observing and listening to it, So that's a thing as well. Like, what are the values of the place that you're writing about? How do they socialize? What are the things that are crossing the line in those spaces? What are the things that make stuff pop off? How do they celebrate? What has been their journey together, their shared journey, right? What are the visual examples of culture? I'll never forget. An associate invited me to go to a convention in Detroit, and I went. I've been through Detroit, but not just to have fun. Sometimes I was usually work stuff. So I went to have fun on this particular trip, and I had a great time because they were so kind and generous enough to take me to the parts of Detroit that represented the city that they loved and the city they knew. So I went to the giant urban farm, that I think when people think about Detroit, they don't even realize is there, right? I know we have a giant farm. We have a farm, Shelby Farms in Memphis as well. I think it might be the biggest in the country, but Detroit has one as well. And it was fantastic. It was beautiful, and it had all these cultural things in it, and I had a great time. Also went to the area where the brother coined the Detroit versus everybody, right? And I got to see some of the very important local artists there, on the street performing. I just happened to be able to go see him while he was there, and he was able to tell me things. And just like going through the city, I went to the spoken word community. We're in somebody's house in the basement, where they have regular sets, and it was fantastic, right? And I happened to go on the night where some of their most beloved poets were gathering for someone's birthday, I think. And so I just, these are the things, like you can have a tourist version of a city that is public and advertised, and it's like on the listicles, right? The 10 things to do in Nashville, the 10 things to do in Memphis, the 10 things to do in Indianapolis, right? But then you have the things that only people from that city would know. They'll know where the real thing is. This is the place where you hear the real jazz. This is where you go get the good food. This is where this person can make you this, from scratch. This is where the artists are. This singer is like, can, sing you to sleep. You'll dream. You feel like you're in dreamland when you get to hearing her perform live. Like only the people of the culture would know those things, right? And if you're bringing, doesn't mean you got to tell all your business. Doesn't mean you got to tell everything, right? But if you do it in a way that doesn't go dun 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 dun. By the way, when I say fintu, that means I'm getting ready to. You don't want to do that. It's not like National Geographic, right? And I would just say off the top of my head, I'm thinking about this. Like there's a musician, a rapper, young rapper named Glorilla. And to me, Glorilla is extremely authentic. I know the North Memphis of which she's from. I used to live there when I was small. I know her accent. You know what I mean? And some of the sayings, you just know. And she's bringing full Memphis to some extent, to her performances and to her interviews and stuff. And it's hilarious to see. It's also endearing. She's like a beautiful personality. And I'm rooting for her because she's having a great time. And it's just interesting seeing stuff that we take for granted in the city, coming out of other people's mouths or other sayings just seeing it on another level, right? And what's very authentic about her is that she's not necessarily trying to translate. It's coming authentically from who she is and her friends. I think the first song I ever saw of hers is a title I can't really say on this video, but it was her and her other fellow girl rappers, and they were like in a playground or outside at a basketball court or something, and it was like that joyous thing that young girls have. I remember that, especially when we were little. And I said, oh, they brought the hand clap game. They brought the whole, the whole roll call that you do. My name is da da da. I'm from some, that whole thing where the jump rope culture, the hand clap culture, all of that. She brought that to rap, and they brought that to rap, and it was just joyous and fun to see, refreshing to see, and that comes straight out of Black girl culture. Straight out of Black girl culture, right? And so when you have artists like her, when you have amazing writers like Henry Dumas, who are taking what people would normally, what is hidden in plain sight, they see it and don't know what they're looking at. They hear it and don't know what they're hearing, right? And we have the codes, and he's sharing it in a very beautiful, creative way for those who can see and feel it. I think that's magical. I think that's really magical. It makes the work live on, and it makes him immortal. He lived a short life, but his work has lived longer. And I think it will continue to live longer, especially as our culture evolves and changes. And as we deal with other circumstances, There are going to be points where we're further away from this, and we need to return to some of these things to remind us of who we are and how we can survive and thrive, you know, even in times when we have to decide if we're going to revolt or riot, right? Yeah.
Sort of like the modern trend, and because you like, I feel like that's a big thing in hip hop, especially is like repping your place, and I feel like in sort of like this corporatized world we live in, a lot of people get clout for, pretending to rep a place, for like repping a caricature of a place, and like it is always refreshing to see somebody like authentically be who like where they're from, so I think the only things that I wanted to add is just like one, to just like really like co-sign that piece just about like building that skill for observation, like in deep observation, like being able to study the people in your environment, and to understand who they are and why they are who they are on a deep level, and then to be able to like capture that, in writing or in painting or whatever medium. I think that like in a way, people talk about they use that analogy of the fish a lot. A fish can't see the water that it swims in. And I think that one of the superpowers of poets is that they can, poets and artists can, we do see that water. And not only like do we see it, but we like are constantly trying to understand it deeper, and so, that leads to like the curiosity to be like, okay, well, what is it about this person's speech pattern that makes it so distinct? What is the essence of this person's like their particular vernacular, um and I think what it brings to mind, and I hate to bring his name up in this space, but it makes me think of Shakespeare, because Shakespeare gets a lot of love as one of the great poets because his work is, timeless, and or that's what they say. And, it is considered that even though it's written in a dialect that nobody still speaks, but he gets a lot of recognition because he captures like, to some people at least, he captures the essence of like that human experience. And to me, that's, Henry Dumas, and Amiri Baraka, and Zora Neale Hurston. It's like even if you don't necessarily use the dialect that they're writing in, which most of us don't. It's been like trained out of us at this point in some ways, not in all ways. I think we still got it a little bit, but I do think that like they know how to communicate the essence of what is being said, kind of like Sheree said. You don't have to spell it all out word for word. You don't have to like chart everything out for somebody, but you can, if you can get the broad strokes, it's like in art, you don't always need to like go to paint the details. You can just paint something that represents the details, and then people get the picture. So that's one thing that I wanted to add. And then I think the other thing that I just wanted to add, and this comes from like my personal experience as a writer and as an artist and as someone who is trying to be more who is trying to be better at like capturing us authentically, is you got to let go of the, I think we're programmed to be very judgmental, of each other, and of ourselves, like this whole thing about like proper English, is like in some ways just like a very toxic concept that a lot of us like still hold on to, this idea that there is a right or wrong way to speak. And you just got to let that go, because it'll have you, like just like we've seen, it'll have you like running from who we like are, like trying to turn us into something else, And I think that like until you can like really come to love us however we come, good, bad, and ugly, to be able to see the beauty in all of it, you're gonna have like your portrayals are going to be unbalanced, And I think that like lack of balance is when the inauthenticity starts to bleed through, you know, when it starts to feel like you're almost like taking sides, you know. I don't feel like Henry Dumas takes a lot of sides, at least not in his portrayals of like, you know, black people, you know, because there's thieves, you know, there's you know, people who are aggressive and mean, you know, violent sometimes, but they're all people, you know. And I think like that's really what it is. It's that they're all people, you know, and they you know, don't nobody just come out the womb like that, you know. The world turns you into that person, you know, for better or for worse. And so you gotta be able to like that's what you gotta learn how to communicate as well. So
Yeah. And I know I probably made it seem like everything he writes is in dialect. It isn't. It's not in Black vernacular. Those are stories that really just kind of got me into the Henry Dumas
yeah,
fan
yeah.
club because it was such a rare thing to see and to see it done well. We know that, you know, the was it Thomas Harris Chandler? I always get these people's three names mixed up, but Harris that, you know, wrote his versions of the Brer Rabbit tales, right? From listening to the enslaved Africans in Georgia, where he was a young, I guess a young, I don't know if he was doing his journalism then at the time, but he was fascinated by these stories and he wrote his versions of it, right? Of course, these are things that we carry with us, right? And carry through through the generations. And in fact, my husband, Danian's grandfather used to tell him Brer Rabbit stories. And I just thought that was such an amazing thing. He didn't think it was, I don't think he realized it was such a significant thing because it's like he had his own versions of it. But, you know, Daniel was so small that he doesn't remember the exact way they go. That's something, you know, you would have wanted to record or write down instantly because like what generation is going to have that, right?
Yeah.
You know, but this whole sense of who Henry Dumas was and what he meant for us as a culture and people, you know, who are discovering his work, that, you know, it's really lovely and exciting to see. Toni Morrison wrote a beautiful essay. I had jotted this down on behalf of Henry Dumas, and it was published in the African American Literature Review in that journal. And she quoted herself in the beginning because she was the one that had said that he was an absolute genius, right, in terms of his work. And the quote was, "He was a genius, an absolute genius. I wish he were around now to help us straighten out the mess." And she wrote that April 24th, 1983. And you're like, okay, what mess? What mess were we dealing with then?
Which mess was that?
Which messes were we dealing with then, right? And it's
always
like
some mess.
always. I feel like I can turn to his work today. It's very fitting that we would have the mumbo jumbo conversation today of all days, right? You know, but I was just gonna say, I already knew it was some bull going down yesterday. I already knew it. It was a number of things, but also I'm not one of the people that, I mean, I'm not gonna say I didn't have hope. I had hope, but I know, I know who of which I'm amongst. All right, and I know how they move. I know how they move, and so there are a lot of conversations about do they want to call them? Do we want to be in the BIPOC community? You know, Black folks' interest is quite different from some of these pox, other people's interest. You understand what I'm saying? Not everybody is invested and deeply rooted in, adjacency to whiteness and what that means, you know, the whiteness in the quotes. And I keep trying to remind some people around me because they act like they don't know, because, you know, people, they're friends and they're doing their work. But the people their nations of origin are anti-Black, number one. They're anti-Black. The countries of which they come from are anti-Black. Let's start with that. Two, either they identify as whatever whiteness would be in their culture, or they get over here and try to do it, right? Now, if you've been to their countries, in some of these places, I've been to their countries, I know how they're perceived and treated in their actual country. But they can get to America and put on a new suit and pretend when they can pretend. But then we find out that even in Silicon Valley, even amongst the high cotton of tech bros, right? that some South Asians were treated very badly and discriminated against by other South Asians based on the caste system that they thought they left behind in their motherland in India, right? Based simply on melanin counts as well. I won't say not just that, but what that meant, right?
Yeah.
So it's like you can have people darker than you, darker than me, will walk around thinking that they have adjacency to whiteness, and what that means. I'm not even speaking on the fact, people are conservative and they have their, particular values and this thing, because that's important to the conversation. But I'm going to begin with the anti-Blackness, right? Because people assume that they have solidarities where they are not.
Yeah.
What they have is a tendency sometimes to watch you sacrifice yourself, right? And walk, over, what is our Chicana sister said, over the bridge that's your back, right? They're gonna walk over your bloody back to get through the doors and the advantages that you created, from your sacrifice. Not that you wanted to sacrifice your life. I hate when they talk about our heroes as if they wanted to give their lives. They didn't want to die. Dr. King didn't want his home, bombed. He didn't want his children terrorized. He didn't want his mother murdered. He didn't want his brother dead. He didn't want to be assassinated, right? That's not something they wanted, They wanted dignity. They wanted civil rights. They wanted what America said it was, right? And so when I think about this and this thing, I'm very aware of the different values around us that do not always align with what we're trying to do, right? Because lots of people benefit from us not having our full access. Lots of people benefit from that. And so it's just something to think about when you are looking at allies and collaborating. Be very real with what you're dealing with, I just say, look, have you been to LA? Have you been to Miami? Talk to me about the people of color communities and what goes down and what doesn't go down. Yeah. So I wasn't surprised. I'll just say that. Plus, the people I was scamming the TV, Joy Reid was looking crazy very early in the evening. It didn't look like we were going to be ski-weeing and stuff, just based on her face. And I'll just say that. Yeah.
That's such a. First of all, I'm gonna laugh at the no ski-wees for one. But two,
what'd you say?
I think I was like, I'm laughing at we were not going here no skis.
Yeah, I already
hear that.
I was prepared.
You were prepared.
But I knew it wasn't gonna go down when I saw her face. That nonverbal.
Your reflection was really insightful. And it has me thinking, I don't know if you guys have an answer, but it led my thoughts to go to intersectionality. And maybe even how works like this and authors like Henry Dumas, who are really articulating cultural perspective and nuance casually, can like shape and curate space for, I think, as you said in the beginning, like different Black American perspectives, ideologies, languages, beliefs, and systems of being to engage with each other. So like I really wonder, as people of color as well, not just because we are Black, really, how do you see this work impacting like different groups of folks, or even like us, or like the participants of Mumbo Jumbo who might not be familiar with his work, or might be different POC coming into this space that can how do we leverage the opportunity that is engaging with other Black people's works and experiences like raw like this, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I have to think about that because I don't know. I mean, people have been enjoying Black culture for centuries. They literally have. Early advertising is based completely on caricatures of Black music, Black dance, right? Minstrelsy. We look at that, right? So a lot of times the only image people had of Black people was through the lens of white hatred, was through the lens of darkness, right? And so if you see a person as a specter, as a phantom of a thing, through the propaganda that's been created, right? You got the step, the slow, yes sir, balls, no balls, and you got the, birth and and all these different references. You got Birth of a Nation being screened from the White House, which is like Trump it was straight up Woodrow Wilson. Trump was straight up Woodrow Wilson, even though he's from Queens, right? Even though they changed their name to try to fit in America, right? You go from Trump to Trump, right? Even though he had a grandfather who was a straight up Klansman, right? He's very much like Woodrow Wilson, pumping hatred through from the White House, preparing to resegregate society, banning us from certain positions in the federal government, all these different things. Like you get ready to go through it, babies, but this is something we already have seen and witnessed. And so when I think about it, I think it was Frederick Douglass who might have said, I have to go back and look, but I don't know if I subscribe to if they just get more Black culture, if they just learn more about our art, if they just hear more music, if we just dance another dance, everybody and their mom gets Black culture. I've gone places where I'm the only Black space there, rural places in these countries, and they got Black urban swag because they're hearing it through the music. They're watching Martin. They're learning English watching our comedies and stuff like that. And so I don't know what else is there to get. We're human. We want to be treated with respect the way that everyone else wants to be treated with respect. We want our children to have happy, beautiful, safe lives. We want to be in beautifully aesthetic places. We want to be able to create and to contribute to the world. There ain't nothing else to be said. So I feel like at this point, as Toni Morrison has said in her, I think she was like one of the origins of the white studies books. We're not the problem, right? And there are a lot of similarities of our experiences with other people's experiences. But the thing, until you solve and cure anti-Blackness at its root, all of it's going to be a challenge, because you can celebrate and love a culture and still not respect and be a good ally or supportive of those people. And people have, to this day, they're gonna love their celebrity artists. They love Jimi Hendrix. They love Michael Jackson. They love Beyonce. Doesn't mean that they want you and your kids in the school next door to them. Doesn't mean that they want you to be their boss and supervisor at work. Doesn't mean lots of things, right? Doesn't mean they want to be married to you or in your have you in their family. I'm not just talking about certain people, right? So culture doesn't always translate into the things that we would hope it does, right? So I'm in the space where I feel like I think I'm a bit done with translating Black culture and trying to use Black culture to free the world. I think I'm in a space, if you already on point, if you already a human who respects and loves each other, and you're a part of the community, and you live a certain way, and you want to be a certain way in the world, and you can respect and I can respect this mutual love, that's where I am, right? But I don't want to put up our art anymore as the cure all for other people's stuff, because we've been there, done that. I don't want to be involved with respectability politics anymore. I think it was Frederick Douglass who basically said that people were in suits being murdered. People were in Victorian dresses, more Victorian than the Victorians. We had high literacy, right? And right now we have a highly educated, demographic, is Black women in particular, right? That ain't stopped nobody from throwing you off the glass cliff at work, right? It hasn't stopped any of that stuff. And in fact, sometimes there's a backlash. So I just feel like find the kindred spirits, no matter the background and ethnicity, right? Don't come to our spaces with anti-Blackness or try to unlearn that, right? Try to unlearn that. And that's something you got to do. I can't teach you. do that work, the internal work, and let's grow and build the world that we should be having. As people, right? Everybody has something positive that they can share, but it's like if you're invested in this caste system, in this racial caste system, if you are invested in that, there's not much we can do together.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we'll definitely have to like dive like way deeper into when we get to riot or revolt, because I think that that's really one of the key things about that. It's like, and I think like even in that story, it touches on some of the anti-blackness and assimilationism that even exists within our own community, right? But yeah, I think that
and in the diaspora as well.
Yeah.
You have communities who literally weren't even allowed to be in the country. We're not allowed to be in the country where mostly because they didn't want them reproducing here. Like that's another part of it. And there are other great writers who've written about that. Carol Anderson is a scholar who's written about white rage and looking at it from a historical point of view, and how actually Black success, Black prosperity was often the triggering point that set racial violence in this country, that made them burn down whole towns. And people talk about Tulsa, but they don't realize they literally dropped bombs on this prosperous town because they could not stand the fact that they were prosperous. They used other things to cover, but it's really about Black success. That is the biggest. They're not worried about any gangbangers, thug people running around with their pants hanging down, shooting each other. That you've done the work for them. They're not concerned. They're not scared by that. What really challenges and frightens them is Black success, Black stability, a person who is not only intelligent and successful, but is not necessarily invested in adjacency to whiteness, in the quotes. And I keep saying that because it is a thing that was created, right? It's a concept that was created. And there are wonderful books you can read about that. Like when the Irish became white, right? It's one of those books. Because there are different groups from other countries who came to America and they were not considered white, right? They had too much ethnicity, right? Which is why so many groups now are constantly grasping for Black culture, because they have turned their backs on their own. And they have beautiful cultures, folk music, folk dances, traditional fashions, all kinds of seasonal holidays and rituals. I mean, they might have kept some of the food, but the visual markers, they try to assimilate into American concepts of what it means to be American. And when you do that, sometimes you lose a sense of self, right? Right. And since Black culture has often become this lingua franca for what it means to be American, everybody grabs at it and puts it on like a mask when they feel like it, right? And so there's a weird dynamic. But you have Black people who fought and battled to create certain rights. Other people have been able to walk through those doors. Then they get here and act like they don't know what it means to not to be able to progress, as if they didn't leave millions of people at home who are doing very badly. As if they didn't leave millions of people back home who are doing very badly. And as if they're not at home working hard to make their country better. You ain't at home doing that. You're here in America, right? And so the things like we don't have another place to go back to usually, right? Most Black Americans have at least 6 or 7 different heritages a part of their lineage, So which flags are they supposed to hold up? Because they had to have a flat Blackness just to survive the peculiar institution that we call slavery. They did not have the luxury to be able to fall back on tribal and ethnic loyalties and say, I'm this tribe, I'm that, they didn't have that luxury anymore to do that. If you ever consider luxury, right? They had to unite. People intermarried or were forced to have reproduced together, right? And so you're creating something completely different and new. So I say all this to say there's a very complex dynamic that we have to deal with. We're often fighting within our own assimilation or what, right? Then you have other groups within the diaspora who come and they bring the propaganda that they have that's useful, sometimes very useful to have as well. well, why aren't you doing this? Well, we have done a lot, but a lot of it also has been bulldozed, like Indiana Avenue by highways across the country. Whole, like, I get to see pictures of Indiana Avenue on the wall of the Kurt Vonnegut Museum at the coffee shop, you know, right? Imagine that played out all across the country, right? Then you have your work and your art very highly surveilled, right? You still have all the things that we always talking about, redlining and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you're not going to always see the visual example of it, right? Held up, because they just run over our cemeteries, run over our homes, run over our communities, shut down our schools, et cetera, which is why the wonderful Paul Laurence Dunbar Library being recreated at the Oaks Academy is a lovely thing, right? It's an amazing thing, right?
Oh,
but
no,
saying
yeah, go for it.
that the culture, like, we're fighting so many battles at once, constantly always trying to say, but we're still here, we're still fighting. We don't have anywhere else to go fight. So we gotta try to make America better. If we're gonna stay in America, we gotta make it better. We can't go to another country. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe things will be a little bit better. People stay where they were and fought for what they have there. And maybe we have somewhere to go to then. You know what I mean? That's for real. But they're under the same boot. In other ways, they're in the belly of the beast in a different kind of way, right? We know that nothing survives without the resources of Africa. Nothing. We won't even have lights. GE can't even light the world without the resources coming out of Africa. But they've been very intentionally denied opportunities to manufacture and produce their own goods from their own natural resources, which everyone else gets rich from. Yeah. You know, so if that's a situation where you can't really do well in your own country because it's being robbed blind, yeah, you get on a plane and come to America, right? But don't come here with all this stuff, because you just left a whole bunch of people back home. And you know what that means. So we're fighting similar battles here in this so-called land of plenty. And I just feel like there needs to be an awareness. So I don't know if art is the thing, but history and culture, that should be definitely taught, so that people can stop coming here and saying crazy stuff to us and behaving in ways that makes no sense. Yeah. You know, when they literally could not even be here without us. You know, I just want to say that. Yeah.
And thank you. Preach. I did want to maybe just put one more question forward before we wrap up for the night. And it's kind of a two-parter. And the first part of that question is maybe if you could just touch a little bit on the way that Henry Dumas's work, relates to Afrofuturism. I know that's something that we think about a lot in the Kepler space. And, I know that's something that you specialize in as well. And then maybe just like close it out with, what do you hope people take away from engaging with Echo Tree and the stories in Echo Tree, or, what's just something that you would encourage people to pay attention to and look for, what do you hope people get out of reading this text?
I think Dumas's work is very much solidly in what Baraka has discussed as the Afro-Surreal. And the Afro-Surreal, to me, is it's in the neighborhoods, in the community of the Afrofuturism. They can say hey to each other, right? And sometimes there's an overlap. So if you're going to do a Venn diagram, we can get into that. What are the traits and the characteristics of these kinds of works? But it's the lens of which you're looking at the culture. It's the lens of which you're telling the story. Both of them are telling the story through the lens of Black cultures, right? So that's Afro-Surrealism and Afrofuturism. But the focus for Afrofuturism is interesting because it has, as you said earlier, a Sankofa approach, right? So after there are works that are Afrofuturists that are looking at alternate past and looking at alternate futures, right? And then you have works of Afrofuturism that are doing excavation, right? That are bringing to light stories and histories, but in this lens of new technology, or in the lens of fantasy, right, which is a system of magic. When I think about the works of Dumas, some of the works of him, works of Ismail Reed and others, there's also this spiritual component to it, Black spiritual traditions, whether it's hoodoo, which is a part of the communities of the African traditional religions, right? These are all things our ancestors brought with them, right? And adapted based on the cultures that they found themselves having to live in now, right? So you'll have, like, for the Caribbean communities, some of their writing and work is not only shaped by their identity as that particular country, but also their identity as wherever they came from originally, and also who they connected with. So with the indigenous communities, with other people, whether it's South Asian or or Chinese people, or East Asian or what have you, other cultures are a part of that as well, and those traditions, to create something new, right? Henry Dumas' work, to me, some of it is definitely Afrofuturist, because he was thinking about where we would be as a people in the future, and how our past shapes us, and what lessons we need to learn from that past, so that we can survive and be able to thrive in the future. Some of his stories were cautionary tales, right? And some of them are just fun. Some of them are just fun, right? A powerful thing, right? What I hope people will take away from it is realizing that some of the things that we're talking about today are not necessarily new. Right? We've been doing this stuff for a minute, right? And it's useful and healthy for us to reach back and to see how far we've gone, and where we were, and to see if it sparks new ideals. That's the thing. What does it spark and inspire in you today, reading this work? What are the similarities? I think the things you could ask yourself as you read these first 3 stories for us for next time. And those are Ark of Bones, right? Echo Tree, what's the third one that you wanted to read?
The Distributors.
The Distributors, that's the real science fictional one, right?
Yeah.
Think about how the work makes you feel on a visceral level, if it makes you feel on a visceral level. Think about what are the references that are new to you in the work. Think about what is familiar, right? Think about the language that he chooses to use to tell us the story, right? And the rhythms of that language, right? Of that. And how did the work make you feel when you read the last lines? And are there any parts or things that you return to, that you revisit, right? And if you had to describe the work to someone else, how would you do that? For a lot of film projects, TV projects, they want you to have a log line or one-liner, right? And think of that as what you would put on the movie poster, right? Or sometimes they'll say, something meets something else, right? So they give you the Black Panther meets, Sankofa, or and Sankofa is a to me a science fictional time travel film that a wonderful Ethiopian filmmaker made, Haile Gerima, made some time ago, and actually has a bookstore. He and his family have a bookstore in DC named after it as well, and it's just a wonderful movie. Time travel movie about a modern, at that time, a modern fashion model who goes on a fashion shoot at a slave castle in Africa. And what happens to her during that shoot. And it makes me think of Octavia E. Butler's Kindred. It makes me think of Walter Mosley's 47. And it makes me think a little bit of Layman Kite. I always miss this brother's name, but I don't know. I guess because I'm so country, so forgive me. So I'm gonna get a note. Say she read this again. Kaisi Layman's Long Division, which is also a special work that explores concept of time, travel, and youth. And in fact, if I were teaching this class, this is a class, I would have you read Ark of Bones, Kindred, and Long Division,
Mm.
and see what conversations come out of it. And if you were a film class, if you wanted to look at film, I would have you watch. Well, I wouldn't have you watch the series because it's a little different, and they didn't finish it. They didn't get to finish it, unfortunately, the Kindred series. So I would have you watch Sankofa, Haile Jarima's Sankofa film, and also a film called Brother Future. Brother Future, which looks like a young, hip brother. I think it's set in like 1980s, like, early 80s, maybe late 80s, maybe early 90s, gets sent back in time. And he has to make it do what it do. As a very scary times. And it's very enlightening. Brother Future is a great film, and it's family appropriate as well. So young people can watch it. Yeah, some great people. But yeah, how do these works make you think and feel when you finish reading them? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sheree. I think that's a great place to close it out for the night. So thank you for letting us end on some recommendations for further reading, recommendations for further watching. Obviously we got to read what's in here, but hopefully getting into Echo Tree, motivates you to get
He's his
into
own limited
some other.
series. He's like an anthology series, like an anthology series of his stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, thank you, Sheree.
huh?
Thank you, Sheree.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, but before we get out of here, one more time, thank you to Sheree Renee Thomas for joining us and facilitating this conversation. Yeah, snaps and claps all around the room. Thank you so much to,
Thank
our
you.
wonderful people in the room and on the Zoom call, and even just watching the live stream on YouTube for engaging, and being engaged, and participating. Thank you to, the Indianapolis Recorder, a longtime partner and friend in community, always helping us elevate our work and elevate this series. And finally, if you want to see more conversations like this, you want to support our ability to hold this kind of space, one, subscribe to our newsletter so you get weekly updates about, what's on the docket for these conversations, but also visit donate.kepra.org and open them pockets. Yep, Sheree got the QR code right there. So, but yeah, so one more time, that's donate.kepra.org to help us to support all the great work we do. And yeah, we'll leave it there. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. See you
Good
December
night,
11th.
Sheree.
Bye.